Die List, Herr Kommissar! Die List! Yes, there you go. Back to the list. Oh my goodness, what's happening with this one? Well, like I said, I like to organize things in my head and figure out where each band goes. So, I don't know how well you can see it from here, but I basically included pretty much all the bands I have in these 4 columns, basically. There are some bands that I really, really don't know where to include, or I kind of know where I should put them, but they would be in a category of their own. So that's no good. I need to have like this kind of collections of bands. So what I try to do, I've just listed the bands I have in my personal collection for the first thing. So for instance, a band like Guns N' Roses, I don't really care about them so much, so I don't even bother to think where they belong in this listing. I mean, it's an important band, popularity-wise, sales-wise, and so on. But musically, personally, up to this day, I haven't found them that interesting. Maybe one day I'll give them a listen and get all excited and all that. But at the moment, this is based on the collection I have right now. And what I did, I always went for my favorite album to kind of keep things simple and then figure out, okay, what style of music is this band playing, where I would place them on my scale here. So I have 4 columns. The first one, I don't know how easy it's to see, but here's like the weird stuff, basically. So I've included here avant-garde stuff, and then progressive stuff. And that's column number 1. And on the second column, I have basic, like classic metal, also starting with hard rock. There's some doom metal, heavy metal. Those kind of blend in nicely because a band like Kiss, for instance, they have made some pretty heavy albums like Creatures of the Night, Lick It Up. You might consider them almost like a heavy metal band based on that, but all in all, I wouldn't say they are. So I put them in hard rock, but it's clearly kind of like there's certain combining factors with these things. It's not always a clear-cut line where it is, so it fits the column nicely. Here's column number 4. All my punky stuff I put here, and thrash being a combination of punk and heavy metal, more or less. I kind of figure out that fits nicely here. Groove metal goes here as well, and then the 4th column would be death metal, so the more modern stuff. Most of death metal for me is prog death. So there you get the general idea. Some of these avant-garde bands that I've listed, some of the really early ones, would be bands like the Beatles, Beach Boys, Smile. Then later on you would get some art rock like Sparks and Kate Bush, stuff like that. Todd Rundgren's Wizard, A True Star might be considered there. Then some avant-garde metal, so now we get to the really weird stuff like Mr. Bungle and all that. So if we kind of consider maybe, I don't know if Revolver is the best example of this, but it starts with the experimentation, certainly. So kind of like this, as just a rock album, it probably wouldn't be that interesting to me. But if you listen to it with the historical context and with some of the studio trickery they were using and all that, yeah, this is kind of around here, and with Sgt. Pepper is when they were started to experiment, and that's an interesting time. The high watermark of this genre of avant-garde would be Mr. Bungle. I've chosen Disco Volante here, not necessarily because it's my favorite from them, but it's certainly the weirdest and I guess the most demanding to listen and get into. There's some absolutely brilliant stuff. Mostly I would say this is brilliant stuff. But there's also something really kind of taxing and annoying about this album, some of the tracks. So I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's certainly really out there. It's probably, I would say, the weirdest album in my collection. So it's always kind of difficult to define weird, but it's out there, certainly. A really wild ride. So, what would be the modern equivalent of this? Well, if we go to 2017 and 2021, there's this French band called Igorrr. Here is, I think this is 2017, yep. Savage Sinusoid album, and here is their latest one, Spirituality and Distortion, from 2020, actually, yeah, not 2021, but 2020. And yeah, I would say that these are a good representation of this avant-garde thing. These are weird albums, absolutely, but I feel they are easier to get into than Mr. Bungle. They kind of keep the weirdness, like they're doing mostly one weird trick thing on one track. So it's not like bleeding all over the place and making everything like really strange. Certainly, if you ask me some modern cool bands to check out Igorrr. What a great band. Definitely, if you like your music weird. Also saw them live, great show. Definitely rooting up for those guys. They make great music. And then what else? Let's go to the next column, which would be about hard rock and heavy metal. I've also included doom here, and pretty much the first and almost only example I have of doom metal that I'm into is Black Sabbath. I know there are plenty of other cool doom metal bands out there, but for some strange reason, Black Sabbath really hit me that hard. I just don't want to really hear some other band trying to do the Black Sabbath stuff, because I think it's done so well here. I think Master of Reality is the first of their perfect albums, pretty much. So this is the earliest example where I would go for doom metal. Do we have anything more modern? Certainly. Spirit Adrift. So this is Divided by Darkness, and I think it was released in, was it 2019? Something like that. So very new example. And I really enjoy this band. Yeah, you can clearly hear the Black Sabbath influence here, but it's there's lots of like stuff from Ozzy's solo career also included here. There's some thrash influence, even some like classic Metallica playing here, and yet they managed to kind of make it perfectly their own. It's like they're using all the classic means, but they have written their own songs, and I think this just works. It doesn't feel derivated or like diluted or anything like that. This feels just perfect. So I would definitely recommend Spirit Adrift. Then next one would be thrash metal. So we have some Dead Kennedys here, hardcore punk. And there's actually a pretty cool new band called Dead Cross, which has Mike Patton involved. And the only reason I don't include it here is kind of a short one, their album. It kind of almost feels more like an EP, because there are 10 songs, I think, but they're quite short. But I would definitely urge you to check out Dead Cross if you're into hardcore punk or crossover or that sort of thing. And I think there's a noise influence also there, so it's really its own thing. Then I would argue that Motorhead might be considered as some sort of speed metal band based on those albums that I have, because it's usually, I like the fast Motorhead albums. I really like the 90s albums like Sacrifice, Overnight Sensation, We Are Motorhead. a lot. I think Bastards has some really, really cool tracks as well. I like Orgasmatron and even Iron Fist. And those are pretty fast albums, and considering they're from Motorhead, and there's lots of that speed topic is handled, and it's kind of like heavy metal, but it's a bit grittier. It's got that punk thing happening there and some good old rock and roll influence involved. So I might even argue they would be almost in like closer to certain thrash metal bands than traditional heavy metal bands. But yeah, that's certainly arguable. I can see that. And then groove metal, Pantera would kind of fall in line somewhere in there. It's not quite as heavy or technical as thrash metal bands, but yet the guitar playing and the attitude and all that, and it is kind of heavy, but it's kind of like different style of heaviness compared to thrash metal bands. So I would maybe put them somewhere in there among almost like the speed thrash family somewhere. I'm not quite sure where, because they're pretty much the only groove metal band that I have. And then there's the classic thrash metal, and I mean Megadeth is still doing great albums. You should definitely check them out, Dystopia and The Sick, the Dying and the Dead. Even though I'm not quite sure the newest one is quite as good as Dystopia, it's still a really cool album. As far as heavy metal goes, I think Judas Priest is still surprisingly doing really, really well. They pretty much started the classical or traditional heavy metal scene. They're still great, still doing good stuff. And in the avant-garde family, I don't know, I guess Mr. Bungle, well, their latest one wasn't really that avant-garde anymore. It was more strictly like thrash metal. But yeah, I would say keep an eye on Mr. Bungle, certainly. It's an interesting band, even though it's an old band. And then there's Priest, then there's Megadeth. So I guess we're up to the weird side of thrash metal now. I think Voivod pretty much started it all. Here's Dimension Hathras might have also gone with Killing Technology. It's kind of a rough one though. I personally like Dimension Hathras better, so this is a good place to start with this weird science fiction thrash metal. The high watermark for me would be Vector's Outer Isolation. I think this is a really cool album, and really they rejuvenated the whole thrash metal scene with this one in 2011. So anything newer than that? Yeah, Vexovoid, absolutely. Call of the Starforger, I think this is 2017. It sounds very, very much like Vector. You can clearly hear the influence. But it doesn't, even though it's so close, and I usually tend to be pretty skeptical about these bands, it feels genuine to me. It doesn't feel like a rip-off in any way, but you can clearly hear the influence. It's pretty much the style of Vector, almost like perfectly the style of Vector, with very, very little changes made. Then there's column number 4, and that's death metal. If I went with basic death metal, there's only one band I'm really into, and that's Morbid Angel. And even they are kind of versatile in what they do. It's not just the basic death metal for me. My brain has a hard time figuring out one song from the next, so that's kind of difficult to me with that. So I prefer progressive death metal because there's more melody involved. It feels like the songs are noticeably different. Arguably, prog death isn't heavier than death metal. I find maybe it's somewhere between like the melodies of heavy metal and thrash metal, and then some of the stylistic things of death metal. So you could argue it's somewhere in between those two things. And then there's melodic death metal, which I feel is a little bit different different compared to that one. With prog death, I mean bands like Atheist and Death in the 90s, Pestilence also in the 90s. There's bands like Sadist, Neglected Fields, Necrophagist, who kind of rejuvenated the whole genre in 2004 with Epitaph. And also the onset of Putrefaction, I think, was released in 1999. Igorrr, Obscura, The Faceless. I think even Meshuggah arguably belongs in here because they're kind of technical. Whereas Melodic Death to me is more like Dark Tranquility, The Haunted, Misanthrope, Children of Bodom, stuff like that. And kind of like technical stuff. But it's more like in the traditional sense, whereas with maybe progressive death is kind of like experimenting more and with some of these more modern things also. So, prog death, where does it really begin? For me, Atheist Piece of Time is probably the originator album, originally recorded and released in Europe in 1989. So it's actually a year or two before Death got in this same style. High watermark for me might be Igorrr, Leading Visions, or maybe this one, A Maze of Recycled Creeds from 2015. Really cool French band. Definitely check them out. And is there a modern equivalent? Well, yeah, maybe. Archspire. This is some pretty technical stuff. Typically, these albums are very, very short, around 40 minutes or so, because it's so goddamn fast stuff. It's really, really intense. I really need to listen to this one more. It's a fairly new album from 2021, but sounds really cool and interesting, and I'm going to be checking that out. So, of course, the problem with these new bands is that I haven't had enough time to listen to them to really know whether they have that same staying power as some of these Judas Priests and Iron Maidens and other cool bands. But if I try to figure out what new bands should you follow, what bands I'm currently following, I would say Priest is still doing some interesting stuff based on Firepower. It really rejuvenated the band a lot. I'm looking forward to their release in 2024. So that's going to be one point of interest for me personally. I'm not a huge fan of modern Iron Maiden, to be honest. Black Sabbath, they quit. Pretty much Rush has quit. Kiss isn't making any new albums, and either way, I really haven't enjoyed anything they've done in the 2000s. So I don't like Sonic Boom, I don't like Monster, so it seems unlikely they're going to make anything interesting. As far as thrash metal goes, Megadeth is a serious contender. They rejuvenated with Dystopia after a couple of kind of bad albums, in my opinion. And then there's the fairly new stuff from 2000s. Igorrr, I think, is a brilliant band. I recently got their newest album, The Orb. I think it was actually released this year, 2023. Check that one out. Obscura, I think they are about to release a live album this year. So that should be interesting. It has been such a long time when I've heard a really good new live album. So this one might be one of those interesting things for me. The Faceless, if they get their thing together, they're going to be probably making something interesting. I have all of their albums. Finally, I got them all. I used to have just 2 of those, and I really enjoyed both. But now I think they've only released 4 albums. So, Igorrr, Obscura, The Faceless, definitely keep those bands in mind. But also, Igorrr, really cool. If you like it weird, check this out. There's even some electronic music involved, and I hate electronic music, but Igorrr makes it work. Spirit Adrift, if you like something doomy and traditional metal. Vexovoid, if you like thrash metal with some interesting, weird science fiction things. If you like Vector, you should give this album a listen. You might be even a bit pissed off that they sound so close alike, but I think this is a really cool album. And then Archspire. If you like it really fast, if you like it really modern, check out this one. All great choices. So that's currently where I see the interesting things happening in metal at the moment. Yeah, so see you on the next one.